It is the literal workhorse in so many different workshops. Handy in so many different ways, which makes it all the more irritating and painful when it goes down. You're taking a look at it. It's a grinder or angle grinder. And in this case, the armature needs replacing. If yours does, here's how to take care of it. Remember, safety first. First, remove a side handle and the guard. You can rotate the guard assembly to disengage it if needed. Remove the gear housing and then separate the gear housing from the motor housing. And remove the rear cover as well by sliding it away from the motor housing. Then disengage the motor brushes. You can use a pick to lift the brush spring from the back of the carbon motor brush and reposition the brush spring alongside the motor brush against the brush holder. Then pull gently on the wire lead to disengage the motor brush from the armature. At that point, repeat this step to disengage the second motor brush. Then remove the armature assembly and remove the drive gear. Grasp the armature to prevent it from rotating. Use a wrench to remove the drive gear's retaining nut and then remove the drive gear from the armature spindle. Now you're on to removing the gear housing cover from the armature. Position the gear housing cover against the open jaws of a bench vise. Adjust the vise so that the gear housing cover rests squarely against the top of the vise jaws. The cooling fan should be centered between the jaws. Use a rubber mallet to tap the armature shaft until the armature assembly breaks free from the bearing inside. That's inside the gear housing cover. Then remove the gear housing cover from the armature assembly. When it comes to installing the new one, install the gear housing cover and bearing. Slide the gear housing cover onto the shaft of the new armature assembly. Locate the socket that has the same diameter as the inner race of the bearing and then position the socket squarely against it. Tap the socket with a rubber mallet to press the bearing onto the armature shaft. Then reinstall the drive gear and secure the drive gear with the nut as well and reinstall the armature assembly into the motor housing. You're almost there at this point. Align the gear housing cover with the motor housing and then reinstall the gear housing as well. And to do this onto the grinder, you might need to be aligning the mounting holes with the gear housing cover and the motor housing. Finally, secure the gear housing to the grinder, usually with 4 or so screws, and then re-engage those motor brushes. Position the brush spring against the motor brush. Repeat the step for the second one. You reinstall the rear cover, the guard, and it's time for a test. Hopefully you've done it. Get that handle back on there. Oh, and not a bad idea to re-grease while it's open. So hopefully you can get back to grinding and safely without any need for repairs for quite some time. Remember, with all DIY, safety first. When doing the repair, make sure you've unplugged it. Wear any personal protective equipment you might think you need, including when operating it, and always follow those all-important manufacturer instructions and suggestions.